The film kicks off in the near future with the President of the United States addressing the nation. As he speaks, he stumbles over his words while announcing that the Western forces, made up of Texas and California, have suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the U.S. Armed Forces. These states, which oppose the legitimate government, are on the verge of collapse. On behalf of the people, the president promises to reintegrate the residents of these rebellious states back into a unified country, just as soon as they overthrow their illegal separatist government and return to the stronghold of democracy. Inside a hotel room, war photographer Lee Miller listens to the speech. Watching the president's expression, she realizes he doesn't even believe his own words. She snaps a picture of the screen just as another explosion rumbles outside her window. The next morning, Lee steps out into the chaos of the streets, slipping on a bright press vest as she documents everything: the rage of the people, the brutal beatings, the sheer force of police violence. In the crowd, she spots a young girl with a camera getting struck hard by an officer. Acting quickly, Lee pulls her to safety. The girl immediately recognizes her, an idol in the world of war photography. Without hesitation, Lee hands the girl her press vest. Suddenly, an explosion tears through the crowd, killing dozens. Without missing a beat, Lee lifts her camera and captures the horror. The girl follows her lead, taking pictures alongside her. Later, Lee meets up with her colleague, reporter Joel, and veteran journalist Sammy. As they discuss the situation, they come to the conclusion that Western forces are closing in on Washington. With time running out, they decide to make their biggest report yet, to photograph and interview the deposed leader in the besieged capital before enemy soldiers storm in and execute him. The only problem, they have to travel over 1,000 kilometers through war-torn America, dodging bullets from radical citizens of the former United States. Sammy, however, refuses. He knows journalists are being executed in Washington. But despite his reluctance, he carefully maps out a potential route, revealing that he, too, has considered the journey. Later that night, an exhausted Lee retreats to her room, only to be interrupted by the same girl from before, Jessie. She admits she dreams of photographing the war and looks up to Lee, but Lee simply dismisses her and walks away. Alone in the bathtub, Lee struggles to shake the horrific images of street executions from her mind. By morning, she steps outside to find Sammy, Joel, and, to her annoyance, Jessie already in the car. Furious, she demands an explanation. Joel shrugs, saying the girl wants to follow in her footsteps, so why not let her? Begrudgingly, Lee gets in, and the team sets off. Not long into their journey, they come across a devastating car pileup. Bullet-riddled and abandoned vehicles clog the road, leaving only grim hints at what might have happened to their passengers. Navigating through the wreckage, Joel skillfully weaves the car forward. As they drive, Sammy lightens the mood with a mock interview, playing the role of a journalist questioning the president. So, was it a great idea to dissolve the FBI? Care to comment on launching airstrikes against American citizens? Joel smirks, amused at the sharpness of the questions, before quipping, "Let's at least wait until the guy finishes his speech before they string him up." Eventually, they stop at a gas station, only to be met by armed workers. While Joel refuels the car, Lee and Jessie step away and notice two mutilated men hanging from their wrists. A worker explains that they're looters, then turns to Jessie with a chilling question: should they be killed now, or left to suffer? Frozen in horror, Jessie can't answer, but before the worker can decide for her, Lee suddenly asks him to step closer to the victims for a group photo. As they leave the gas station, Jessie sits in stunned silence, realizing she never even raised her camera or objected to what happened. Lee, unshaken, reminds her of a simple truth: journalists don't ask questions. They record. It's up to the world to decide what to do with what they capture. If Jessie wants to be a war photographer, she needs to toughen up. Their journey continues through burned-out cities littered with corpses. At one point, Lee asks to stop at a wrecked helicopter. She orders Jessie to photograph it, and the girl complies, sharing a bit about her past, her father, a farmer who refuses to acknowledge the war, clinging to the illusion that everything is fine. She also explains that she's using an old film camera because good digital ones are nearly impossible to find these days. Apologizing for tagging along, she waits for Lee's response. But Lee couldn't care less about her thoughts or feelings. Her only concern is getting the shot. Finally, Jessie asks a haunting question: if they execute me one day, will you photograph it? Later, Lee confides in Sammy that she always wanted her photos to serve as a warning, but instead, they've just become a collection of moments. The older journalist reminds her of how passionate she was when she was younger and urges her to be more mindful of the girl, knowing what young reporters have to endure. Joel points out that Lee has lost faith in the power of journalism. Suddenly, gunfire erupts in the distance, and the group decides to stop for the night. While resting, Joel talks to Jessie, suggesting she stay behind where it's relatively safer. But she's stubborn. She refuses to hide from danger. The next morning, they arrive in a town caught in the middle of a firefight. The team embeds themselves with one of the groups, capturing the brutality of war through their lenses. Jessie, caught up in the moment, takes shot after shot while a soldier desperately tries to save his wounded comrade. The journalists follow a group of soldiers storming a building, documenting every move. They record a wounded enemy being executed, along with the laughing faces of soldiers unfazed by the chaos. Sammy watches calmly as prisoners are killed, while Jessie films it without hesitation. Lee, however, turns away from the scene altogether. Later, they move on and arrive at a refugee camp where they can get food, though no shelter. The camp is set up in a former stadium, where children play with abandoned sports equipment, oblivious to the horror surrounding them. Lee brings Jessie some food, and is surprised to see her developing film on the go. Jessie admits she knows how Lee's career started. Her photos of a student massacre made headlines worldwide. Lee reveals that her own parents also choose to ignore the Civil War, just like Jessie's father, who stays on his farm pretending everything is fine. Later, Jessie scrolls through her photos on her phone, showing Lee her work. Lee admits that out of 30 shots, she usually only gets one good one. Then, she acknowledges Jessie's photo of a dying soldier as truly remarkable. That night, they rest by the fire, and by morning, they're back on the road, traveling through a ruined, smoldering country. Eventually, they reach a town that appears untouched by the war. The people there act as if nothing has changed, almost as if the team has traveled back in time. They enter a clothing store, where a saleswoman cheerfully invites them to try on whatever they like, explaining that the town simply chooses to ignore the war. Jessie urges Lee to try on a dress and takes her picture. For a brief moment, they let themselves believe life is normal again. But as they step outside, Sammy points out armed men on the rooftops, the price of their so-called peace. As they continue driving, Sammy reminds them how leaders like Gaddafi, Mussolini, and Ceausescu all met the same fate in the end. None of them got the chance to say anything. Joel's hopes of conducting a full interview with the president are likely in vain. Suddenly, they spot an abandoned amusement park with a dead soldier lying in the middle. As their car inches forward, a gunshot echoes. They quickly take cover behind a building, where two soldiers are already hiding. The soldiers casually admit they have no idea who the shooter is, but they'll take him out because he fired first. While the soldiers handle the sniper, Lee simply lays on the grass, staring at the flowers. Finally, once the path is cleared, the team moves on. On a forest road, Lee notices a car trailing them. She decides to slow down and let it pass, but when it catches up, she realizes it's their colleagues, reporters from Hong Kong. One of the journalists moves over to Lee's car mid-drive. Not wanting to be left out, Jessie attempts the same stunt and hops into the Hong Kong team's vehicle. As they drive ahead, the teams exchange updates, but suddenly, they notice the other car has vanished. Lee's gut tells her something is wrong. Soon, they arrive at a farm and spot the Hong Kong team's abandoned car. Up ahead, Jessie and the other journalist are being held at gunpoint by a group of armed men in camouflage. Lee manages to stop in time. They haven't been spotted yet. Watching from a distance, they see the men dumping bodies into a mass grave. It's clear these aren't regular soldiers, these are criminals. Lee asks Sammy to stay behind while she and Joel approach. Joel tries to explain that they're just journalists passing through, but one of the gunmen suddenly shoots one of the Hong Kong reporters without hesitation. Then, with eerie calm, the man starts questioning them. When he realizes they're from the Central States of America, he kills the second Hong Kong journalist without a second thought. At that moment, it becomes terrifyingly clear he has no intention of letting them leave alive. Suddenly, Sammy's car speeds onto the road, slamming into the bandit, but Jessie is thrown straight into the mass grave. The girl regains consciousness atop a pile of bodies and frantically crawls out. Joel manages to grab her, and they leap into the car as Sammy floors the gas. The awakened soldiers fire at them, but the car speeds away. Jessie and Joel scream in shock from the trauma they just endured. After a moment, as they begin to calm down, they realize Sammy is wounded. They carefully move the old man to the back seat and continue rushing forward. Night falls as they drive through a burning forest. The mesmerizing sight of flaming trees and flying ash engulfs both sides of the road. By morning, they reach a military camp controlled by the Western forces, only to discover that Sammy has quietly passed away. They reunite with their colleagues and learn that the government troops have practically surrendered. Their dream of capturing the ultimate story seems lost. The capital is now defended only by the last remnants of stubborn soldiers and the secret services, meaning Lee and Joel are too late. There will be no grand story, and Sammy's death appears to have been in vain. Later, Lee rejects Joel's statement. She reminds him that Sammy always wanted to die on his own terms, not from illness, making this outcome not the worst. The Western forces advance toward Washington. As Lee cleans Sammy's blood from the car, they decide to follow. At night, the journalists reach the White House and begin filming everything unfolding around them. A real battle erupts on the city's streets. Lee and Jesse document the soldiers' faces, their bravery, and their deaths. They follow a group clearing roadblocks and breaking through to the president's residence. The Western forces surround the White House. One of Joel's colleagues informs him that victorious troops are landing on the Congress building from helicopters, signaling that the war is almost over. The president is undoubtedly inside the White House and is as good as dead. Suddenly, the president's motorcade departs from the building, pursued by soldiers. They fire upon the official vehicles, but Lee immediately realizes the president isn't inside. She leads her team toward the White House. Noticing this, a detachment of soldiers follows them. Inside, bodies of the dead litter the foyer. The building is in ruins, broken and scattered, yet no living people are visible. The soldiers instruct the journalists to stay out of the way as they begin their search. The team obediently follows, documenting every moment. Soon, they arrive at the press conference room, where a female negotiator appears. She requests assurances of the president's safety in exchange for leading them to him. However, before any deal can be made, the soldiers shoot her without hesitation and continue their advance. A brutal firefight erupts with the president's guards in the corridors. Lee is horrified by the unfolding chaos and barely takes any photos. In contrast, Jesse relentlessly pursues every new shootout, her sensitivity slowly fading. At one point, she becomes careless and rushes into the middle of a corridor. Lee spots a soldier across the way raising his weapon. Without thinking, she lunges forward, knocking Jesse down and shielding her with her body. A shot rings out. Lying on the floor, Jesse films the last moments of her mentor's life as Lee collapses beside her, fatally wounded. But even after witnessing this, Jesse rises and follows Joel, who sprints toward the Oval Office. Inside, the soldiers finally capture the president. Joel halts the execution, attempting to question the man responsible for his country's downfall. But the president only pleads for his life. The soldiers execute him without hesitation, and Jesse captures the final moments of the U.S. president's life through her lens. Then, she takes a haunting image, the victorious Western soldiers grinning against the backdrop of the fallen politician's corpse. A terrifying picture, an action-packed film soaked in blood. A political warning about how quickly the world can descend into madness. The director masterfully transposes the horrors occurring in foreign lands onto the streets of America.